We're going to go ahead and jump into everything. We're going to look at the importance of design. I know in the first session we kind of got rushed in time and we weren't able to publish the form completely, so we're going to do that in this session. We're going to be looking at the form and making some changes to the form, talking about just some of the different things you can do with design, and then even talk about some of the advanced topics of things you can do beyond what we're showing you. So what we're going to show you today is all of the simple out-of-the-box configuration. So no code, no CSS, nothing custom, no custom branding. This is all just very simple things that you can do with the web parts and what you can do out of the box. And the reason that we want to show that is because when you have to develop advanced things, you should only be developing advanced things once you determine that what's available out of the box doesn't work for you. So we want to show you what you can do out of the box, and then if you guys have questions on things you can do further, we can chat about that. So, all right, you want to take this one?
Yeah, okay, so the user interface, I spoke to Jennifer about this yesterday. I said that I went through a whole day of a training session referring to the UI, and somebody came to me at the end of the session and said, what does UI mean? So I have to be very clear that we're talking about the right thing here. So we're talking about the user interface. And as we showed in the last session, and we touched upon it a little bit in the first session, out of the box in SharePoint, we get kind of lists and libraries, and we look at the we haven't really got anything cool going on in our current user interface. So their experience of the site at the moment is going to be quite poor, really, because they're just going to have all the standard sort of out-of-the-box things to add to that page. Do you want to?
Yeah, and so what we want to do with the user interface is we want to design something that when they go to access the system, they're going to be able to easily get to the data. Okay? So based on the things that we're doing in this one, we're doing a travel request solution. So what are some of the types of things that you think people might want to easily get access to on the site? So you have the traveler information, so I might want to see my traveler information. So what are the preferences that I put on the site? Maybe I want to be able to edit those. Maybe I want to see a history of all of my travel requests. Maybe I just want to see my approved ones. Maybe I just want to see the pending ones. Maybe I want to see different web parts for each one. I may want to just have a single page where I go fill out the form and I can see my history and I can see my preferences. So we want to design something that kind of accommodates all of those different things to make it as easy as possible for the user to be able to interact with the solution. So just an example here of something you can do. When I say we have different web parts, you know, up here we have an image, then we have different web parts with different pieces of information, and as you click on certain things, they filter all the way down. And that's the same concept that we're working on here, is to figure out how can we design a home page for this travel application system that's going to make it the easiest and best solution for my users.
It's kind of like what we was talking about in the first session in the planning stage, except now we've got some actual data to work with, some parts to connect together, if you like.
And then we might want to, you know, just put different web parts on pages,
yep.
Different details, different things like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over and I'm going to show you, show you the site. Okay, so a couple of notes on this. I'm showing you guys on a rather large resolution so that you guys can see everything. So just bear that in mind as we're looking at it. I've purposely designed a very narrow form so that you're able to see all of it plus see the other web parts. When you're building this in your environment, you're going to be building it towards a different resolution. So what we have here is the travel request site. So we come here, we can see my travel preferences. We can see trip history. I can see all of the trips that we have going on here. We can see the status. And then I also have the form. So I can come down here, I can complete the form. Notice at the bottom of the form now, instead of seeing a submit button, I see an error message and it says once you complete all of the required forms, then you're going to be able to submit the form. So one of the things that we've done with this UI is we said, well, let's make it so that there's not even a button to click if they don't have the right information. Because if there's no button to click, then they're not going to get an error when they click the button if they didn't fill in all of the fields. So here we have it. We can come up here. And then as soon as I fill in the required fields, okay, now my submit button is displayed. So as soon as I have the required fields in, then I'm going to see another button. So this is another method that we can use with the UI to make it easier for people to see. You'll also notice that when I click into the form, I do not see the InfoPath ribbon anywhere. So if I'm trying to fill out the form, there's no ribbon. There's nothing that says save as, submit, or any items like that, because I don't want to confuse the users. I'm going to show them one button that says submit when it's time to submit. Okay? So those are some of the small changes that we've made to the site. Here I have a web part that's just going into my travel preferences and just doing a filter based on the current user. And then for my trip history, we're doing a filter based on the traveler according to the current user on the site. The rest of the site here with the My Trip History, the My Travel Preferences, and the Travel Request site, notice that that's all formatted the same, and then below it we have that horizontal line. That's all just using the HTML markup codes that are already in the wiki page. So you can just get those styles and apply them, and you can quickly build the page. So we're going to kind of now walk through the process of doing all of this. Before we do that, does anybody have any questions? I thought I saw a hand go up. It might just be, okay. All right. So we're going to look at doing this, and the first thing that we're going to look at is that we have the travel request web part. Okay, so this is done using the InfoPath form web part. How many people have used that web part? Okay, just a couple. It is my favorite web part in 2010. I love it. So you can do so much with it. But any time you customize a list or a form library using InfoPath, then you have the ability to add the form web part to the page. To come up. Okay. And when you go and edit the web part properties, we'll be able to see the form that we're connected to. Okay. So we can see what form library we're pulling from. Okay, so we see that we're pulling from the travel request library, and we're pulling the form content type, and we're saying what view we want to have it displayed on, okay, and what we want to do after we do the submit. So I can put this web part anywhere on there. So if I had a form that I wanted to put the button on the page and I want people to just be able to quickly fill it in, I could have a button on my InfoPath form and I could put this on the page. Another great example I've seen of this is when I'm in an intranet. So I'm on a corporate intranet site, and I want to make a way for people to easily submit suggestions or to submit help desk tickets. You can do a little form web part that lets them just click in a few things and hit submit, and it sends off the data. So another thing I want to show on this page when we're just looking at this page is what happens when I submit the data. So let me come back over here. Let's see if I close this.
Well, that's saving. So Jennifer was talking about the help desk tickets thing. It's a good way as well to, if you've got a whole list with a whole bunch of information, like help desk tickets generally have 20 or 30 columns with all the different bits of information you need to fill in, but you can just have those, the main things you would have, like the title of the ticket, what the problem is, and maybe a priority or something. So you're really cutting down the form, putting that on the homepage for them to submit it, and then it goes through the whole process, and you'd have all your workflows and things associated with it to move the help desk ticket on.
Yep. And the other thing that we've done on this form is that we've added an additional view so that when you submit the form, they actually get a message that says your form has been submitted. So now I see that my form has been submitted. When the page reloads down here, now I see that I have that one that I just added has been added to the site. Okay? So I'm able to quickly give them the form. Once they complete it, they go to a view that says it's been submitted. If they needed to complete another form or if there was something else, they could just reload that page and then it's going to reopen that empty form. So again, you'd want to do that based on what the users are doing with the site. If I have to continually fill in the same site, instead of giving them a view that says your form has been completed, I probably want to figure out a way to reload the page empty. Or I want to take them to another form or something along those lines, or take them to another page. So those are some of the things. So the first thing I want to do is open the form in InfoPath and show you guys some of the changes that we're making. So you see that this is from the same form that Laura and I were using in our first session, okay? So I shrunk it down. Again, the reason it's so narrow is because I want you guys to be able to see it when we put everything on the screen. But we have this form down here. The very first thing I did was add an image to the top of the form. Pretty simple, but people like their images. So we went ahead and added an image there. And I came down to the bottom of the form and I added 2 sections. So remember we said in the first session that a section was a way that you could hide data based on criteria. So the criteria that I'm using for this form is that I have 3 fields that I have set as required. So departure date, return date, and event name are the ones that I have set as required. So if you click on it and do the Alt-Enter, you can see that I've got it as cannot be blank for all of them. Goodness sakes. Okay. Okay, so we've got cannot be blank there. And then also on this one, cannot be blank. So then I have the 2 sections, and what I want to do is apply a rule to each of the sections so that they'll be displayed under a certain time and they'll be hidden under a certain time. So when you select the section, you can come back over to your Home tab and you have a rule pane. So if I say Manage Rules, you're going to see the rule pane come up. And what I have here is I have a hide if complete, and I'm setting conditions. So if the departure date is not blank, and the return date is not blank, and the event name is not blank, then I want to hide this control. Okay? So we want them to be blank. If those fields are blank, we want it to be displayed. If they're not blank, we want this message to be hidden. Okay, then I go and do the exact same thing over here, just kind of with the opposite logic. So if departure blank, let's see, I did it in 3 separate rules. If departure date is blank, then you come over here if the return date is blank, and you come over here if the event name is blank. So the reason you can do it in 1 rule or multiple rules, what I'm just showing here is that if you have the multiple rules, you can do multiple conditions. So if I need to say if this and this, then I set 1 criteria, then I come down here and set another criteria. That's why you could go through and you could have multiple condition statements, or you could do multiple rules on top of each other. So in this scenario, the first rule runs, then the second one, and then the third one, versus in this scenario, all conditions run inside of that 1 rule. So it's just 2 different scenarios of really doing the same thing, but you might have different logic reasons as to why you wanted to separate them or put them together. So once we have the form configured with these pieces, we're going to just publish the form back to SharePoint. So I'm going to come over here, I'm going to say publish, and this is where the demo failed in the first session, but we're going to come over here and say SharePoint server. Okay, it's going to verify the server on the template, and since this has already been published, it's going to go through the process. I have to save it locally, but when it goes through the process, it's going to keep all of the defaults that we already have. So it's going to publish it back to that location that it was last published in. So we see that we've got the travel request site. Then we're going to say next. And it's going to ask us what library we want to go to. There we go. So I'm going to say as a form library, I'm going to pick my library. So travel request, I'm going to just update the existing library. Okay, and this is where I can pick what columns from the form do I want to show up as columns in the SharePoint library. So when this gets published, where am I going to, what fields in my form need to become fields inside of my SharePoint list? So if I come over here and just modify it, you'll see that I've got this department field. So this is pulling from the fields in the form, and then I can pick it to go into one of the list columns or some of the other columns. Okay. So over here, you see that this is just a form column called event name. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, then I can say next, and I can publish my form, and the changes are going to go out there. Okay, so we're going to let that go for a second, and then I'll go and show you the view. Let me actually just cancel. Okay. Okay. All right.
So we're just filling in the blanks that kind of we were talking about in the other sessions before, making sure we sort of answer those questions.
Yep, and then the other thing that we have with this one is that we did the page that said thank you for submitting, your request is being processed. We do that through a concept of views inside of InfoPath. So if we go over to page design, we have a collection of views here. So I can go to my thanks view. Okay, I could create a new view if I wanted to. And you'd see it's going to come up and it's just going to be an empty view. So it's going to be just an empty page, and I have access to all of my fields, so I can create different views of the same thing. This would be the scenario with the views, is how you can do page 1 and the next page 2, the next page 3, go back to previous, and you can configure your views that way so you can build a form that they can complete via process. Okay, so for ours, we just have the page that says thanks. So we have that there. Where we're going to use that is on our existing page. For our submit button. Our submit button has got rules on it that are going to submit using the data connection that we created that takes it back to the SharePoint library. Once it does the submit, it's going to switch to the thanks view. So that's really all we're doing here. Is just that after the submit button, we have another action in that same rule that says, okay, now show them another view. Okay, yes, sir?
When you submit your form, is there any check to validate the fact that your form has been really submitted? Because you said we submit and we send.
No, this is not going to be going in and doing a 100% this is submitted. What's going to happen is if it errors out for InfoPath, you're going to get one of those weird error messages that it's there. There's really no logic that we're doing in this form that's going back and saying, yes, I have verified that you're submitted inside of SharePoint. So we're not doing a wait or anything like that. After it kicks off the command, it's either going to fail, which I don't think I've ever really seen it fail. Only if you're having a serious server error is it going to fail. Otherwise, you're going to get the message. I think there was another hand, maybe. Yeah. Okay. Okay. And then the last thing I wanted to show that we changed here is we went to File, and if we go to Form Options, we completely disabled the InfoPath toolbar. So I came over here and completely disabled that. Okay. So that's the first step in some of the design changes we want to make to the site. It's just making that available. And then we're going to put that web part on there and then configure it. Are there any questions on doing that? Yes, sir.
So if we wanted it to be configured, how would you do it?
You'd have to do it through custom code. You have to do it through custom code. There's no way out of the box. So it's going to move on to that next step of the rule after it successfully passed it off. But that's still, after it successfully completes the submit. But if I complete the submit and the submit is, submit it to email, there's no way for it to know. It just knows it was able to kick off and do its phase of the process and it would go. So if you want something that's really going back in, you'd have to write code to go check the library, validate it, and put that message there.
And you could have a workflow that checked for new items, and that would then essentially be a confirmation that it's been added to the library, but it's not really not in the same way as you would in custom code, kind of confirming what's been sent across the wire.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Okay. So that's one of the first small changes. I've seen this done with a lot of forms. Actually, most forms now, when people do it, instead of going to a library and saying new item, they take people to a Webpart page that has the form completely on it so that your users just have to navigate through SharePoint and do that. So let's say that I had a page. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go to more options and I'm going to create a new Webpart page. Okay, so we're going to come over here. We're going to create a page. I'm going to pick a Webpart page. I'm going to create it. Okay, demo. Pick any of them, that's fine. We'll put it in Site Assets and say Create. So now, this might be the blank page that I want to put my form on. So I can come over here and I can say Add a Web Part. And when I go to Add a Web Part, this is the part that's different in Office 365. It comes up and you have this instead of coming up in the ribbon. So I'm going to insert my InfoPath Form Web Part. I'm going to just add that to the page. Okay. Then I can click here, I can open the tool pane, and then I can come over here and I can select the Lister library, and I can select anything that's here. So we have our traveler request, and then we also have our traveler's information. So we're going to just go with travel request, and then it's going to ask me what type I want to do, so form. Okay, now I can come over here and I can pick from my view. So I have view 1 and I have thanks. So I'm going to just say view 1. I'm going to come down here and hit apply. And I have it on the site in a web page. Okay? I'd probably also want to come over here to Appearance and hide the Chrome so that you wouldn't see the title that says InfoPath Form Webpart. Okay. So this is a way that you can do that, and then you can get users and just send them directly to different pages and they can fill out the forms. All right. And again, you see they've got the form down here. Okay. Another list that we have customized using InfoPath is when we go into the travel preferences list. Let me actually just come over and so view all site content. Just another piece to show you guys. Under travelers. This list has been customized, and this is another one that you could put on. You could put on another Webpart page, but here we've got air travel, car travel, and additional notes. And so they could go through and pick which one they wanted to, and then it would expand the section. So again, this is just to show you some of the different things that you can do with the InfoPath forms. This is just customizing a SharePoint list, but it gives it that usability feel if people want to make different changes to it. So just another example of some of the things you can do from a usability perspective to enhance the different things inside of SharePoint. And this is just a simple SharePoint list that we customized. Okay, awesome. So up next, Matt, do you want to start talking about, I guess, the list and the list views? Do you want to get us started there?
What, to create a new list view?
So the next piece we're going to go over are these different web parts, and maybe Matt can just kind of talk us through.
Yeah, okay, so when you add your list, out of the box you've got your standard set of columns. When you create new columns and add those to that list, they'll just add it onto the end. And what you tend to see is, especially with something like this where you have quite a lot of information in the form, your list view will be very long. We've probably all seen it where it goes off the edge of the screen and you're having to scroll across the screen. This is not a good thing for users. They definitely wouldn't expect that kind of behaviour. So, well, there you go. You can see it on the same sort of thing going on there. So, I think what Jennifer's going to go and do now is create a custom view then to sort of shorten the amount of information that we see there.
So you guys, when you're working with SharePoint, do you guys take advantage of the views? Okay, so there's a lot that can be done inside of SharePoint Views, and what I find is a lot of times people don't necessarily understand that, so they don't see the power of some of the things that they can do. So our goal for here is to create something that we can clean up and make it nice that will fit on the home page. So if we can come over here to create a view, and then we can pick from one of the standard views, and then we're going to want to go down and let's see, we'll call this demo. And then we can pick the columns that we want to display. So maybe they don't need to know their full name. We know what that is. Their frequent flyer, seat preference, rental cars. Maybe we want to show them number of trips. Maybe we don't. So we can see all of these different things. Okay, so we've got all of our different columns there. And then do we want to sort it? Do we want to filter it? So for this one, we could filter, and we would want to say where the traveler is equal to, and this is where we'd want to go in and put me. Me is the value that you want to use when you want it to be equivalent to the person who logged onto the site. So if Matt logs onto the site and he loads the page, that view is going to load to Matt's detail where Matt is the traveler. If I log onto the site, it's going to load my information. So that's where we're going to go ahead and put that filter in there. Then we're going to come down here and we're going to go to the style, and this is where we can change it. I'm going to start with newsletter and see what that looks like. That's usually my go-to style. Okay, so you see that we've got a different view now. So it's just filtering to one item. There's not 4 there, and I can see the information. I can then keep, if I wanted to, I could modify this view. The interesting thing about the newsletter style is that the more columns you display, it's going to display it in a different format. So I'm going to just select all of them right now so that you can see I've got a lot of columns displayed. And if I say OK now, for the newsletter style, it's starting to, let me pick. Have you guys worked with the newsletter style much? After you get to a certain width in columns, it starts to stack everything for you. But it's dependent on the types of columns that you pull over. So
have you used styles in general? Because a lot of those sections are kind of hidden. Unless you want to try and find out what's in there, you don't really have a go. One of the things that was quite embarrassing, I was doing a demo of views, And I enabled inline editing. Have you tried that before? Where you can change the different things in line. As soon as you switch on the views, the different styles, inline editing doesn't work. So yeah, the lesson learned there is don't demo one before the other, because it just makes you look like an idiot.
So here I added the notes, and so you see that because it pulled that extra style in, it's going to put it on 2 lines instead of having 1 line. So it's just different things that you can do. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a way of preventing the users when they see their own view from going in and seeing everybody else's or the other views?
So you'd have to do that through security. And so this is just a single view that's filtering my item to me. But there's one thing that you should note about SharePoint: views do not equal security ever. So if they have access to the list, they're going to have access to all of the views. Even if that means they sit at their desk and try to figure out what the views are, they can still figure it out and they have access to it. So no, in our case here, we've pretty much said, and again, we kind of said that this morning, that everyone's scenario is a little bit different. In our scenario, we're assuming that people can see each other's travel data. I know in other places that might not be the case, so you'd have to customize it according to that. But what we're doing is just pushing the data to relevant users, but it's not security.
You could create a view and make it the default, delete the all items one, and not let them create personal views. But as Jennifer says, it's not security,
It's not
and if they can still
really
get to it if they
security.
want to. They can still get to the information. So it's a way to pretend that you've sort of made the view just for them.
I guess the column, say you want to hide a certain column,
Yep.
you take it out of the all items view, and
Yep.
you don't permit them to make a personal view.
Yeah, but there's things like lookups will surface that information, web
Yeah.
services. There's a whole ton of stuff that RSS feeds, if it's configured that way, would show it. So yeah, it's really it's good for certain circumstances, but if your job depends on it, definitely don't do it that way.
Yeah, it's definitely not security. Yes, ma'am.
Could you not go into advanced settings and change the settings in there so that
Yep.
the person viewing the list can only see
So
that?
the setting that she's talking about in the list, and that's available in list, it's not available in libraries, but you can go down here, and this is a type of list permissions where you can go into list settings, and you can go into the advanced settings, and you have some options for item level permissions. So you could solve that problem this way, or you could do item level permissions. So yes, this is one of the ways to solve it, but this is only on a list and not on a library. So basically, you know, the moral of the story is views don't equal security. So just be very careful with them. But then it begs the question of, well, what is security? And so a lot of times when people tell you this is a secure form and people can't see it, I like to challenge them and say, really? Is it secure and people can't see it? Or is it you don't want people to see it because it's not relevant to them? So you have a lot more options when the concept of I only want them to see relevant information than you have if they can't see it and it's a hard line in the sand. So you wanna watch that. If it's the hard line in the sand, then you really need to be doing it through SharePoint permissions or through a setting like this. Great questions. Okay. One of the other things I want to show you, so on our home page, we kind of have things designed so that they can't really edit or change anything. We just have that item there. But one of the other settings that we can set is if we come down here, and I'm going to reopen that view that we were at, we could come down here and set the inline editing view, which is the one that Matt was just talking about. So I'm going to come down here to inline editing, allow inline editing, and I'm going to go to styles and say default. And one of the things I like to say in my sessions is that the style always wins. Style is the last thing applied. So it doesn't matter what you set above. If you pick a style that doesn't support it, it's not going to be displayed. So we want to make sure that when we use some of the inline editing in the tabular view, that we go ahead and set the style to default. We're going to come over here and say OK. Now if I was to use this, the person on the home page could edit their information without ever having to leave the page. Okay? So if this one was on our home page, so let's say we come over here to the home page here. Let's say we could edit this home page. And right now we've got my travel preferences over there. If we came over here to this web part, now that we have that view, we could say edit web part. And I can load that demo view that I was using when it finishes loading. Okay. So we can come over here, we can load the demo view. It's going to say, hey, you're going to lose any customizations you made. That's okay. So we'll come over here, we'll hit apply. Okay. Okay, now you see I'm going to come back over here, save my changes to the page. Now if I wanted to, I could come over here. I could see my data. I could click it and say, I no longer like Delta, I like United. Okay, and I can save my changes. So that's something that's very easy for your users. They don't have to go into a list item and change anything. They were able to change that directly from the SharePoint homepage. So it made it very simple for them to interact with it. So there's lots of little things like this that you can put on the page that are going to make it easier for your users to work with the content. Okay? Any questions? Yes, sir.
I assume that form validation setup would be triggered if you do inline editing and also workflow would be triggered if necessary.
Yeah, so the inline editing is separate from the workflow. This is just a list feature that they have there. So as long as you use the default style, you can use the inline editing. And you shouldn't have any problem with it then. And then the list is still going to behave like the list would behave, so all the workflows and everything will kick off without any issues. Great.
Yeah, that comes down to the triggers thing, so it'd be on item change, that kind of thing.
Definitely. Yes, sir.
Once you create a form and submit it and it's approved, one of the things we would like to do is, for example, with an electronic ticket, and attach it back. How,
And attach it back to the form, or?
I guess, when customers fill in the form,
Mhm.
it says a rail ticket, you purchase a rail ticket, you need to put it back, and you go back and share something, download it. How do you see that?
Okay, so you're talking about sort of external content, the actual hard copy content.
Well, I filled in the form.
Yeah,
The process of buying the ticket is external.
yeah.
Downloaded it, and then I uploaded it back.
I'm imagining that through that process somewhere they would fill out the form, something would happen, and then something would go back to them that would let them print off whatever it was. I don't know that they would necessarily, and then you might have a dashboard or something like that that shows the order form and the completed ticket. So you could do that through lookups or different items like that to keep all of them referenced.
Yeah, if you was having sort of things you were scanning in or something like that, then you might want to have an external library and then have a look up to that. You could use attachments, but they're not very good to do that kind of thing. It's better to have a look up to a library, in my opinion.
Yeah, agreed. Okay. The next web part that we want to look at that we have on the page is the My Trip history. So one of the things that Laura talked about when she did the My Trip history is that she was taking the username and pushing it back up to the site, and then she's storing it in the list. So if we go look at the list here, I'm going to go to Site Actions, I'm going to go to View All Site Content, and go to the Travel Request List. You'll see that I've got whoever modified the form, but I also have the traveler. So you see here we have the difference between Laura modified Darvish's form, Laura modified my forms. I think Laura made a lot of our forms. So Laura's in there making a lot of the forms. So when we go to do a filter on the site, we can't necessarily filter by who created it or who modified it because somebody else might have done that. And so what we have is we have this traveler field, and we're able to use one of the filter view web parts for the current user, and we're able to pass the value of the current user into that web part to do a connected web part. Okay? So to do that, let me go back to the home page.
So has anyone used connected web parts so far?
Couple people. Good.
Okay, good.
Okay, so we are going to load up this page here. Okay, so this is the web part that we want data to go to. It's interesting, the filter web parts on a wiki page, and we'll get into a conversation about a wiki page in a couple minutes versus other pages. Until I get into the edit mode of a web part, I don't necessarily see that filter web part. But I have my filter web part here, and if we edit this web part, we're going to see the context that it's using. It's using the current user filter. So we've got it current user, and then we're pulling the current user. We could also use a profile value, something that was stored in the My Sites we could pull up if I wanted to. We could pull up one of those profile values. But for us right now, like department or manager or something like that. But for now, we just want to pull up that username, and then we want to send that value. So we're going to come over here to Webpart Connections. come over here to connections. We're going to send filter values to travel request. And we're going to click on travel request. And it's going to come up and it's going to show me what fields I'm looking at to do the connection. So it's going to pop up any minute. Okay, so we're going to see that current user is looking at the traveler login field. So the field in our form where we're storing the domain name and the username is a field that was called traveler login. So when we publish the form from InfoPath to SharePoint, when they hit submit, we're saving the login username of the traveler so that we can look it up later. So we're going to do that connection and say finish. And then we're going to see that this entire list is filtered to only show the list where I'm the current traveler. So if someone else were to log into the site, it would be filtered based on their credentials and their login. So this is one of the out-of-the-box filter web parts that comes with Enterprise. So you're able to add this. If you just came over here and said insert your web part, you would be able to find that as one of the filter web parts. So we come over here, and we've got the filter. Whoops.
So it's one of the quick wins with SharePoint. Anytime you can target information to people, so the information they see straight away is relevant to them, it's always going to be quite an impressive thing for them to do. So as I said, but out of the box, you kind of see all that information anyway, and you're just going to get a definite thumbs up from your boss if you introduce something like this.
Yep. The next level, so we've kind of covered right now the basics of things that you can do inside of the browser. So you kind of have the different list views, you can set up those different styles, and do different items like that. To get additional levels of customization, you can actually take the entire site and edit it inside of SharePoint Designer, and then you can build what are called custom list view web parts. So you can basically add some additional customizations to those list view web parts. So it's another level of customization that we could do, and we could do some conditional formatting. We'll just make something up right now to show some of the conditional formatting or something along those lines. Go ahead. Okay, so we can come over here. We will go to actually, I think it's under site pages. Make sure I'm pulling up the right. Okay. Okay, there we go. So I can pull up this page. I see the information about the page, and I can come over here to edit file. So you see the page that I have pulled up. This is not, which one is it? There we go. Okay, so I see my filter here. I see this web part. So I can come, to these web parts, and I might want to come over here, and I can, style these however I want to. So I can come over here, do simple stuff, make changes to it. So we can make the changes there. I can also come over here, and as I go in the web part, I have all of these different options for customization. So I can do filtering, I can do sorting and grouping, conditional formatting. A lot of these items you can do from the browser, but now you have additional items like the conditional formatting. So let's say, if departure date, we can come over here, do conditional formatting, and we might want to, format the column, and then we can pick a comparison. So let's say that we just said that the actual date, so let's see, departure. Let's just say if it's greater than today, that's fine, we'll set a style, and then we may come over here and set it to green, okay? So something along those lines, if it's greater than today, then it should show up as green when we're doing it. So these are different things that we can set in the web part and apply additional formatting. You can also come over here if you wanted to do paging and different things like that. If you had a lot of items, so if they had a lot of travel items, you could just show them in groups of like 4 per page and different things like that. So some of the conditional formatting. Now, were you going to talk about some of the advanced things you could do with the formatting?
Okay, so one of the things I just want to mention there actually is when you're going through some of these things, you want to check the default values as well, because when you're in Designer and you're making kind of custom changes to the XSL like this, when you look at the code, it's easy to, on your test environment, to assume that it's going to work when you put it on your production environment and there's lots of data there. And you might be working with 5 or 10 bits of data. So just checking the default values will save you the pain point of going back and saying, actually, I didn't want to limit by 10. It needed to be unlimited or whatever it's going to be.
And when you're working with it, if you want, you can come over here to the design view and you could say sample data. So if you don't want to have to load it with a bunch of different data, you could come in there and it will fill it with 4 or 5 options so you can see some of the different settings.
Okay.
Do you guys have any questions on this? Okay. Then I think Phil, yes, sir.
How do you distinguish between a test environment and
That's kind of IT pro question, I guess. You should have a test environment. You should have a production environment.
So with SharePoint Designer, there really is no test environment. SharePoint Designer is a tool that is meant to be used against a live environment. So a lot of times what people do for a test environment is they have an environment where they can test certain things from SharePoint Designer. They may bring down a copy of a site and back it up and test it. But then when they're ready and they know what changes they want to make, they go make those changes live to the site.
so they repeat the changes?
Yes, in most cases. And that's just the nature of the tool that is SharePoint Designer. It's meant to make live changes to a site.
And when you're doing stuff like we're doing here, you're not going to go and do that whilst people are using the site. You're going to go and create the page, create the way it looks, go in Designer and make all your changes, and then you'll make that the home page or publish it or whatever it's going to be. That's kind of a definition of testing it, because in my opinion, you wouldn't work with the live data like that necessarily.
Okay. So we've kind of given you a quick overview of just some of the changes you could make to the site. Can you guys think of anything else that you would want to make to the changes to the site? I mean, what do you guys think comparing this site, comparing with the one that we saw this morning? It's a little different. So I think this is the last one we were looking at. So you definitely have a difference. So it's a lot easier. If we were using this type of site and we weren't, making all those customizations, we could come down here and, we're going to get to the same, that's not what I wanted to do. In the travel library, you have to go in and you have to tell it to, when you have the web part there, you actually have to tell it to turn on the full toolbar so it opens that form that way. So it drives me absolutely nuts with that. But we could still get there through the same thing. It's just a lot more clicks to get there. So you'd have to go to the library and then hit the form.
Do you suggest having a site for each form then, when you're presenting it like this?
That's a wonderful question. So the question is do you have a site for each form? And I'm going to give you like the #1 consultant answer of it depends. So what I recommend that you do is within your organization that you develop a forms strategy. And as part of your form strategy, determine when does it make sense to have a site versus a site collection versus just having many forms in one site. I would try to go as simple as possible by starting and looking at, okay, what are the main forms that I'm doing? The trouble that I run into is people who say, okay, we're going to just have one central location for forms to generate forms. That's fine, but then as soon as they start putting all of the business logic into it, you end up with many applications sitting in one spot. So usually if it's just a simple form and there's no workflows or anything like that attached to it, then that might just be a couple of different form libraries in one site. But for like a travel request system like this, I'd recommend having your own site so you can have different lists and libraries and pull everything together, but then everything stays together and it's easy to manage. What I do recommend, though, is having a forms portal somewhere that directs them to whatever form it is. Because at the end of the day, your users could care less if it's a site, if it's a list, if it's whatever. They just want a single spot to easily find what they're looking for. So I think it kind of depends on the nature of your forms and the complexity. It's a great question.
I think the difficulty as well is when you're working with document libraries, you think that you add different content types and you put a lot of different documents in the same place, and so you've got that kind of mentality, and then when you come to a forms library you kind of think in the same way. But yeah, I think Jennifer's right. You wouldn't want to then put everything in the same place. It wouldn't really make that much sense.
At what point in this qualification move into the Hive content
So anything, so he's asking more of a developer question. So he's asking the content database versus the Hive. The Hive is the actual files on the server. So anything that we're doing from the browser or SharePoint Designer or InfoPath is stored in the content databases. And that's just the nature of the types of tools that we're using. It goes on the server when it's a custom developed solution. So when it crosses the line from the tools that we're using and goes into Visual Studio or third-party products, then it becomes something that gets deployed as a solution, and it's not in the content database. Okay, yes, sir.
I apologize, you may have answered that this morning. When you said to use Feeler or InfoPath Designer, so the one you call behind or what?
Yep. So an InfoPath filler is just like a client light version that allows you to fill in forms. If you want to build any type of form that you're going to publish someplace, you have to use the designer. So you would just use the filler when you're a user who's just completing forms, filling them in.
And when you haven't got the web-based form, Webpart.
Right. Okay, I guess it was more like you create a list and then you customize it into InfoPath.
Okay, so are you asking when you use a SharePoint list versus when you use a SharePoint form library? Again, it's going to depend on what you're doing and the complexity of it. So kind of talked about that this morning. A lot of it just has to do with the amount of columns. So let's say I just have a small, simple thing. I might be able to use a SharePoint list because all of my columns need to be columns on the list. But if I have something like a repeating table or a large data set and I only need to publish some of those columns, then I could use an InfoPath form. So a lot of scenarios, it's going to be 6 of one, half dozen of the other, so it's going to be independent of what you want to do. You could use either one. So some of it is preference and then others functionality as to what you're trying to do. The more complex you get, the more likely you're going to need an InfoPath form because it has greater functionality. Great. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Can I take information out of other site collections or other workspaces?
You can through a data connection inside of InfoPath. So you would have to do your data connection and you could connect to a different source and then you could do it. But again, as Laura and I were kind of talking this morning, depending on where you're pulling your data from is going to dictate the type of form you have to publish. So if you're pulling your data from like another data source, like another server or something like that, it could very well have to be an administrator approved form. So it gets a lot more complex. So it depends on what you're trying to do. Okay, good questions. Can you think of anything else that you might want to see that would help with the layout of this? Any other questions that we have? We are like right on time. We have like 5 minutes left, so we can kind of take any questions. Yes, sir.
Administration based against general users, so in this case you have administration as an audience.
Yeah, so what I would do with that is I would come over here. I would go to more options. I would simply create a page. I would call it admin, and then I would go restrict it so that only administrators could see it. And I would come over here and I would add a different set of web parts to this page that are specific to managing it. So an admin probably isn't going to care about their data. They're going to care about the tasks that are assigned to me. So I may want to come over here and add a web part because, presumably you're only going to have a handful of people that are approving things. So I might want to come over here. I would pull my lists and I would probably come over here and say tasks. I would add that one there. Actually, let me minimize this guy so it's easier to move. There we go. So I might put this guy in here. I might come over here and add another one of the exact same thing. So let's say list and libraries. So I might start to build out a page like this, and then I would come over here to the web parts and I would put in views that would matter. So I may come over here and probably edit the web part, and in this view I may put my overdue tasks because I want to see those quickly. So I could come over here, I could put, active task or maybe due today. I just want to see what tasks are due today. So I can come over here and say due today. And then if I had any, they would be there. And then in the web part next to it, I might put something. I might come over here and put something else in that one to show. Let's come over here, restore this one. So for this one, I may come over here, and if it doesn't have the specific view I want, I could maybe go build a custom view for this web part that just says, tasks that are overdue. So we could come over here, edit the current view, and do a filter that might say where due date, say, is less than or equal to today, and where status is not equal to completed. I think it's just complete. Then we could come over there. So then we have that guy. So then on one single view, I would see my late tasks, and I'd see the ones that are due today. So I'd go about building whatever an administrator needs to see by just placing different web parts and such on the page. But then I would add, I could come over here, copy this URL, and then add it. If I go into site settings, do something to the navigation. So in my case, I have the top link bar. I might just come over here and add it for admin. So something along those lines.
It's one of those things when you're creating systems like this, you're going to identify the users and how they get to the information. And clearly you would identify that there's somebody going to be the person to administrate the system. And so you would then go and think about creating that extra page as well for them.
Yep. Yes, ma'am.
Laura this morning talked about what she really didn't like about the clunky approving process and workflow. Could you use these pages to get around that?
You could.
You could use something like that.
Yeah, so what she's kind of asking is if I don't want to send people through the email and I don't want to do the approvals, couldn't I put, in theory, a collection of different web parts on the page and then use different things where they're manually changing values?
So everything's brought together
Exactly.
in one place rather than sending the user here, there, and
Exactly.
to the site.
Exactly, and you can use a lot even within views and stuff like that inside of InfoPath to just put all that data there so they can approve it from within InfoPath. So that's the exact concept of the type of thing we want you to take away from this session, is that you can kind of pull all of those pieces together to build a composite solution. Did you have your hand raised? Yes, sir.
Using InfoPath, can I create a form everyone can input information into, but only a restricted audience can view the results?
You can do that a couple of different ways, but in most cases you could put that in there, and then as soon as they submit it, it could immediately move to a restricted library. As soon as they could submit it, you could restrict it to that they only have access to add to the library, but they can't read it. So in theory, yes, you'd probably do that using a workflow, or you could do permissions inside of the InfoPath. I mean, there's a couple of different ways to accomplish that, but yes, in theory, you can do that. Yes, Laura?
I wrote a blog post about that. It's called Submitting Forms for Relocation. Moving it to another library.
Laura wrote a blog post about that, so you can get her link in the blog, and I'll take you there. Yes, sir.
Two things. First, at the beginning of the session, you said you had a book to give away.
Ah!
My second question is, can I have it?
Yes, you can. Good job.
Cheap, I know.
Hey, yes, sir.
I'm just curious about the InfoPath Webpart.
Uh-huh.
Can you put two of those on the page, one into different?
Yes, you can put two of those on the page, and then you can also use parameters with those so that when I fill out values in one, it passes parameters to another and things auto fill in.
So doesn't this more or less solve the repeating table problem?
No. The repeating table, because then when you have two different InfoPath forms, the repeating table, they're not that aware of each other.
Right.
So it's a nice thought, but you'd still end up very broken. Yeah.
How do you archive the really old stuff to somewhere else? What's the best strategy?
Really old stuff, meaning like 2007 stuff?
No, well, travel from 2007, what do you mean?
Oh, okay. So what you can do, have you guys seen the information rights management inside of SharePoint? So inside of a list or a library, let me show you guys that real quick. View all site content. This is probably the simplest of ways to do it. There might be other ways that are more complex. So again, you have to judge and balance what you need based on your complexity. But if I go into this library, I go into the library, settings. I can come down here to
If you like this
information.
kind of thing as well, by the way, there's records management sessions going on over the next couple of days, so they will go into massive detail with this kind of stuff, I would imagine.
So I would want to enable retention, and then once it comes up, I can add a retention stage, and then based on a date parameter, So I could do created by, but I could probably also do departure date. It might be approval date. And I could say, 3 months after the departure date. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to move it to the recycle bin. So if I don't need the data anymore, I can get rid of it. I can bypass the recycle bin. I can permanently delete it. In most cases, you would transfer to another location or you would start a workflow. So if I pick start a workflow, then any workflows that I had for the site I could start, and it would be based on that date criteria. So that would be one way that you could easily clean it up and kind of set the automatic to clean it up fairly simply.
So you can ask the question of the person that created the file. It's been 6 months since you last used it. Do you want to get rid of this now? So, yeah, something like that.
Did you have a question?
Is that just standard or enterprise?
The records management, I believe, is an enterprise. Yeah. I don't know if I'd swear to that. Matt kind of gave me a look.
I think that's
So
in
is that
standard.
standard?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
so.
Does that apply to forms and the forms and the data submitted via a form? Can I expire that?
Can you expire what?
The data submitted via a form?
Well, that is the date. So it's the form item. So yes, it's getting rid of that item from the SharePoint list. Yeah. Great question.